Hello and welcome everyone to This Week in Game Shows. I am your host and two-time game show loser, JD Lape. This week we're going to be discussing this week's episodes of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. It was a really interesting week. Had a handful of $5,000 winners. Had a couple of people reach the $50,000 question. No one unfortunately got it, but we had a big winner of $30,000 this week. And let's kind of dive into some of the high points I was noticing over the week. Starting with Monday's episode, our first contestant this week was Elizabeth Cagle, a nurse from Dickinson, Texas, which is funny because she was introduced as a nurse, but after the first commercial break, Chris Harrison decided to ask what she did for a living and seemed genuinely surprised that she was a nurse, even though he introduced her as one. So just a funny thing I picked up from Chris here on Monday. I guess we'll give him a pass since it was Monday. We did have a typo in one of the questions. Her $1,000 question actually asked, the Huffington Post lists all but which of these has its 3 feng shui rules that will boost your bedroom, and they wrote the Huffington Post. So good job there, guys. Maybe double check your spell check there before you go ahead and put that on air. Nonetheless, she got it right. Luckily, seeming it was only a $1,000 question, so that wasn't too big of a problem. The funny one came for her $5,000 threshold question, which read, due to more and more states voting to legalize recreational marijuana use in 2016, what company founded in 1868 saw its stock rise to an all-time high? And I was totally expecting some kind of food company, because when you have recreational marijuana use, you tend to see more people eat a lot more. So I was thinking the Munchies. And while Papa John's was one of the answer choices, they obviously weren't founded in 1868. So Papa John's, Netflix, Nintendo, they were all out the door, and Scott's Miracle Grow seemed the most likely answer, which it was, and she won $5,000. So congrats to Elizabeth for reaching that first threshold. She ended up getting all the way up to the $30,000 question, which was, which of the following sitcoms did not earn acting Emmy wins for all 4 of its main cast members? A, Seinfeld, B, The Golden Girls, C, All in the Family, D, Will and Grace. I did not know this off the top of my head. I felt like first looking at that, it was Seinfeld, just from possibly something I remembered reading sometime back in the day, but I had literally no idea. She asked the audience, 52% said All in the Family, but that was after she had brought down her +1, which was her daughter. And they had discussed All in the Family, and the daughter didn't know what that was. Rightfully so. It was a show back in the 60s and 70s, or back in that time frame, and so the mom spent a few minutes educating her daughter about what All in the Family was and who played on it. So that was kind of funny. But I think the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in-studio audience tends to skew younger, and so All in the Family would be the one that I would think that would be least recognizable, and so I think that was the reason why 52% of the audience said All in the Family was the sitcom that did not earn acting Emmy wins for all 4 of its main cast members. 52% for All in the Family, 17% Seinfeld, 20% Will and Grace, and 11% The Golden Girls. Ultimately, Elizabeth did go with the audience and went with All in the Family. And unfortunately, she was incorrect, because the answer was indeed Seinfeld. Just a funny feeling, like I said. I had no idea. It would have been a total guess for me. But she ends up with $5,000, so congrats to her. That's a good day's work. Trust me, I know. And we get to our next contestant, Dan North, from Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. And Dan, good on you for wearing your prep school blazer. That was part of your school uniform back in the day. 19 years old, sophomore at Duke. He wore this blue plaid-looking blazer. Like I said, it was part of his school uniform back in high school. And that's what you got to do on these game shows. You got to stand out some way, whether it's personality-wise, story-wise, or aesthetically, you know. And I assume that he wore this jacket to the audition, which was a good idea if he did. But good on him. We learned later he actually started Monday, went to Tuesday. Learned later that he was a stutterer growing up, and he went to a lot of speech therapy, and he is now an active member in the National Stuttering Association, and he does workshops at their national conference every year. So good on him, you know, and his parents for giving him getting him the speech therapy that he needed to work through his stuttering, and to be able to live out a dream on going out on a game show and winning a fairly decent amount of money, especially for a 19-year-old kid. We'll get to how he did in a second, but like I said, just want to applaud him. It's a beautiful story. Good on him. His $1,000 question had to concern with the largest pet insurance company in the U.S. I don't know why Millionaire just didn't say what that company was instead of wording it very generically as they did. Just an interesting little tidbit I like to pick up on. So either way, it didn't matter in the question. The $3,000 question, where was this when I was on there, to be honest? The $3,000 question he faced was featuring the fitting motto, "Find your honey." On which of these dating apps does the woman always make the first move? Luckily for me, I knew the answer. Well, luckily or not, I'm not the one playing, but it's funny because a couple of years ago, all of my female friends that have boyfriends decided that they wanted to get me a girlfriend as well and set me up with a Bumble account. So that was fun while that lasted. Not that you guys need to know anything about my dating life, but as Chris mentioned, after Dan got it correct, way to play it off as if you didn't know what Bumble was, because he tried to use the logic with the find your honey and bumblebees. Like, that is the logical route of things, but as we all know, Chris has to make the show funny, so it's got to be entertaining for everyone. So, and plus, if you're 19 years old, I'm pretty sure you knew what all these apps were anyway, so not a big deal. Of course, the answer was Bumble, Find Your Honey, and is the only app that I know of where the women make the first move. So, Bumble, OkCupid, Plenty of Fish, Coffee Meets Bagel. The answer was Bumble. We're gonna jump ahead to his $10,000 question, which was, who is missing from this sequence of former U.S. Vice Presidents: Harry Truman, Alvin Barkley, blank, LBJ, Hubert Humphrey. His choices were Adlai Stevenson, Richard Nixon, Barry Goldwater, Spiro Agnew. He rightly surmised that it was right before Kennedy, because you had Harry Truman, who served under FDR, Barkley, who then served under Truman. The blank would be the president after Truman, which was Eisenhower, and then after that was LBJ, who served under JFK. So we are looking at Eisenhower's vice president, and as I said, Adlai Stevenson, Richard Nixon, Barry Goldwater, or Spiro Agnew were the choices. He wasn't too sure. He seemed confident, though, that it was not Richard Nixon, which is ironic, considering if you know your vice presidents, then you would know that Richard Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president and is the correct answer in this case. But he did call down his mother, who was equally as confident that Nixon was not Eisenhower's VP, although she did admit that ultimately she was unsure. And it's funny when you know the answer, and I think Chris knew the answer at the time. So as they were discussing and how sure they were that Nixon was not the correct answer, they show some shots of Chris and he's smiling, and it's like, oh my God, no. He's just giving that, hey, no, my God, you guys need to get back to Nixon right now. So, but luckily, on top of the +1, he did use his 50-50, which eliminated Agnew and Stevenson and left Barry Goldwater with Richard Nixon. And his mother was confident that they were looking for Eisenhower's VP. And Goldwater is a Democrat, they both knew. Nixon, they both knew, was a Republican. Ultimately, he decided to go for it and say Richard Nixon as his final answer. And he did win the $10,000 question. So, well done and good use of lifelines there, especially because you guys, they had all but eliminated Richard Nixon at that point. And through the use of the 50-50, luckily, and his mother, knowing that Barry Goldwater was a Democrat, they were able to deduce that Nixon was indeed the missing vice president of that list. So good for them. The next question, the $20,000 question, had to do with this year's Kentucky Derby winner, Always Dreaming. Basically, you just had to know who or what Always Dreaming was. And ultimately, the answer was Kentucky Derby winner for $20,000. Good for Dan. And he ultimately walked away with that amount. So a nice big winner, especially for a 19-year-old kid, like I said earlier, to overcome what he has, and to be on the game show, win $20,000 as a 19-year-old. Good for him. Congratulations, Dan. We move on to Kristen Sawsville, a stay-at-home mom from Newark, Delaware. Kristen, I have it on good authority, was a Jeopardy champion back in the day, so good on her. Congratulations on that, and congratulations on making it onto Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, like so many other Jeopardy champions and former players have done. Another funny moment with Chris Harrison was the $2,000 question for Kristen, talking about aptly named Dallas Raines and Storm Field. Both work in what field? And the answer is meteorology. It's a pretty obvious answer, even if you didn't live in the home markets of Dallas Raines and Storm Field. I do live in Southern California, where Dallas Raines is a very prominent meteorological figure. So that was an easy question for me, and it was for Kristen as well, because Dallas Raines and Storm Field, I mean, you're not going to work in any other field, right? But then as they go to break right after that question, Chris mentions, yeah, Dallas Raines, Johnny Mountain, of course, what else would they be doing? Which is hilarious, because Johnny Mountain used to be a meteorologist at the same station as Dallas Raines a few years back. And so I just thought it was funny just because Johnny Mountain wasn't even part of the question, but Chris went ahead and mentioned him anyway. I guess it's easy to do. I mean, Chris is from Southern California and or works out here, and so he knew who Dallas Raines and Johnny Mountain were, and it's easy to lump the two together, but still funny that he mentioned it, and I'm sure like 90% of the audience who overheard that comment either didn't catch it or didn't know who he was talking about with Johnny Mountain. So funny stuff. The $5,000 question had to do with the inspiration for the bob hairstyle, which Kristen correctly surmised was Joan of Arc. It was from a French stylist whose name I can't remember because I didn't write down the question, so good job me. But there were two French answers, Joan of Arc and Marie Antoinette. And as she said, Marie Antoinette wore a lot of wigs, very long hair, which is not so much what a bob is. And so with Joan of Arc as a soldier, having the shorter hair would be to her benefit, and so logically she went with Joan of Arc, and it was correct for the $5,000 question, so she reached the first threshold at $5,000. The one thing I would like to talk to Kristen, if I'm ever lucky enough to do so, after the $10,000 question, she slapped hands with Chris, like a good old, hey, high five. And I was wondering if there was something that happened during one of the commercial breaks where they established some kind of camaraderie, or if they had a handshake coming in, what was going on with that. And so I never got a handshake. I don't see a lot of slapping hands, high fives. A little jealous. Maybe not so much, but, you don't see Chris do that very often. So for me, that would be an interesting question to ask. Like, how did that come about? Because that was Chris that initiated the high five. It wasn't Kristen. So, again, just little observations that have nothing to do with the game, but I just find it interesting. And so, but that's what makes it fun, I think, not just playing the game, but watching it as well, seeing Chris and the contestants interact with each other as they can. I apologize for looking down. I have my cell phone with pictures of the game that I took note of, along with my actual notes. So I'm doing my best to keep my attention at both places, so that way I'm not just doing this, or I'm not just looking down the entire time. So bear with me as we continue through Kristen's game. Her $30,000 question, she brought down her +1 Tim, who I absolutely love, because when he came down, he gave the best handshake ever, I think, to Chris. He shook his hand, and Chris usually goes, hey, how you doing, and like claps your shoulder. And to me, when I looked at it, it looked like Tim was like, hey, how you doing, buddy, and then just kind of like slapped him in the chest. Like, I thought that was hilarious and great. Again, more small details that don't really have to do with the game itself, but if you pay attention and see that stuff, it makes the show that much more enjoyable to see. So Tim, good on you. You're my favorite +1. Not just for that, but you also knew the $30,000 question after the audience. Only 8% of the audience voted for the correct answer. You came down and told Kristen that in cognac, the acronym VSOP or VOSP, stand for very old superior what? The answer was B, pale. I'm trying to bring up the picture again so I can tell you the other answers. So VSOP, very superior old blank. Excuse me, I messed that up too as I read the question the first time. A, proof. B, pale. C, peat or D, port. 52% said proof, which again, it's one of those things where it seems that's the easy answer to go to for the audience, just because it's a word that they're probably the most familiar with, especially in terms of cognac being an alcohol and not a beer or an ale. So like a pale ale is probably what people were thinking, or a port. Cognac is not. So, and peat, I'm sure a lot of people didn't know what that was. So proof seemed to be the go-to answer, with, like I said, 52% saying that. And you kind of tend to be skeptical with the audience. A little higher in the chain you go. Like I said, this is the $30,000 question. And so this is really around the time of game where you're really not going to see huge majorities, like 60-70% plus. You're going to see, if you're lucky, at least one answer get at least 50%, like this did. And then, like I said, pale came in third place with 8%. And good on Kristen for not being too sure and making sure with her +1, calling Tim down. And he knew it right off the bat. He knew the answer was pale. And so she went with her friend and 8% of the audience. And she won $30,000 because of it. So nice job, Kristen, on that question. Now, the $50,000 question is where we hit a little snag. And I would like to, spoiler alert, welcome you, Kristen, to the I Lost on the $50,000 Question Club. Uh, President Me. Her $50,000 question was, which of the following countries is not named after an actual person? A. Argentina, B. Bolivia, C. the Philippines, D. Mauritius. She and I, at the very beginning, knew the same that B and C, Bolivia and the Philippines, were named after people. Simon Bolivar for Bolivia, King Philip of Spain for the Philippines. For me, I didn't know Argentina or Mauritius in terms of their namesakes. As she was talking it through, she correctly surmised that Argentina is named after silver. However, she talked herself out of it and went with Mauritius because the other country, Mauritania, which is a shame because Argentina ended up being the correct answer because it was named after silver. Unfortunately, she did go with Mauritius. Again, another question I would like to ask her, if at all possible, just because, you know, when you get on the bright lights and the big stage, I know I've lost the $50,000 question, so this is no shade whatsoever. I just want to know what the thought process was, especially after saying that she was pretty sure that Argentina was named after silver, because the Latin for silver is argon, and the symbol on the periodic table is AR. And honestly, I never put all those together in the first place, and I didn't then, so I wouldn't have been able to get this question either. But like I said, absolutely no shade to any of these contestants, no matter how much they win, or if they walk away, or if they get a question wrong, because I've been there. As I said at the beginning, 2-time game show loser. No shade from me whatsoever. I just like to go in and talk about, you know, what the thought process might have been there, why she talked herself out of Argentina, you know, what was just going on. So yeah, unfortunately, she got it wrong. The $50,000 question was, which meant she dropped down to $5,000. Still not bad. 30 minutes work, you know, $5,000. Where else are you gonna get that? Certainly nowhere that I know of. So congratulations to Kristen on her $5,000 win on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which leads us into Tina Slutsky from Brentwood, California. She's a retired publicist. Yeah, I had some beef with one of the questions here. Her very first question, as a matter of fact. Let me pull it up real quick. Me of being a Detroit Lions football fan. Her first question was, in mythology, what was the present that inspired the warning, beware of Greeks bearing gifts? And her answers were A, ugly socks, B, fruitcake, C, Detroit Lions tickets, or D, the Trojan horse. Now, I don't know if they have a Green Bay Packer fan as one of their writers writing these questions. I take some umbrage with Detroit Lions tickets. You know, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. Like, I would welcome it just as much as the Trojans welcome that horse into their city. You know? So... Okay, ultimately it was funny. The Detroit Lions have not been very good for quite a while, at least during my lifetime, which spans about 3 decades. So I understand. Still take umbrage with the question and that answer. But anyway, moving on. I don't want to get too depressed here talking about my Detroit Lions, who've lost 2 in a row, by the way, and not in first place anymore in their division, but I digress. Her $5,000 question, funny enough, had to do with the real estate agencies, and all 4 of them. So in 2008, what real estate firm hired the designer Jeffrey Bean to redesign the company's iconic, though much maligned, gold blazer? and that's associated with Century 21, which was obviously one of the answers because it is the answer. The others were Remax, Sotheby's, and Coldwell Banker, which are all also real estate companies. But in her reasoning, it just seemed like she went with Century 21 because that was the only one she recognized as a real estate company. And so luckily enough, that was correct. But also, if you think about it, the other ones are, their color scheme is some type of red, white, blue. I mean, Century 21 is the gold and black. And like I said, like they are known for their gold blazer. And so if you knew that, that would have been easy. And luckily for her, it seemed like she guessed Century 21 because, like I said, she seemed like that was the only one she recognized as a real estate company. So good for her for getting that. Reached the $5,000 threshold. Got to the second level of questions where she did pretty good. The $10,000 question had to do with what was the only country that produced more wine in total volume than the United States in 2016, I should say. Argentina, Spain, New Zealand, South Africa. For me, Spain jumped out first just because I know that practically, as a Californian, pretty much all our wine is produced here in the state of California, and so I know that we are known for our more temperate Mediterranean climate, and so the only choice there that came close with the Mediterranean climate was Spain, which sits on the Mediterranean, because South Africa, New Zealand, Argentina all sit on the south end of the southern hemisphere, and so their climates would not be as temperate as Spain and California. So that's where I was kind of leaning. Of course, sometimes trying to logic these questions out doesn't work out. You can ask me, if anyone, but ask anybody who's played on some of these shows, whether it be Millionaire or any other kind of show. Sometimes logic works, sometimes it bites you in the butt, and in this case she did use her 50-50, which left New Zealand and Spain, and she did go with Spain, who are known for their wine, obviously, as they did produce the most wine in terms of total volume in 2016. So she went with it, got it correct, got her $10,000. Good job on her. For the $20,000 question, she called down her plus one, which was her husband Elliot. Now for me, this question had to do with country star Waylon Jennings. Well, sort of. The question, in 1959, country star Waylon Jennings famously gave up his seat on an ill-fated aircraft whose crash took the lives of artists known for all but which of these hits. So you really had to know who was on that plane with Waylon Jennings. The only one I really remember is Buddy Holly. Then the other one, so the answer choices were La Bamba, Your Cheatin' Heart, Peggy Sue, and Chantilly Lace. The answer was, and her husband knew this off the bat, was B, Your Cheatin' Heart, which was not a song known by one of the artists that was in that plane crash. And I forgot to. He mentioned all the names. Like I said, I knew Buddy Holly. I believe the Big Bopper was one, and I cannot remember the third one off the top of my head. But thanks to her husband Elliot, they were able to go home together, as she threatened to make him walk home from the studio if he got it wrong. So $20,000 for her. That ended Wednesday's episode and led into Thursday, where she got the $30,000 question correctly and then reached the $50,000 question, the second contestant to do so in a row after Kristen. And the $50,000 question had to do with which reality show has produced more female winners than male winners. Or I should say the only one to. And the answer choices were American Idol, Survivor, Biggest Loser, or Project One Way. as a big Survivor fan, I was able to pause the episode and go through and count and see who were all the winners of the 34 seasons of Survivor. That may or may not be a problem. It would not have been in this case, being able to recall all 34 winners. I wasn't really a big fan of American Idol. I can only produce a handful of winners off the top of my head. Kelly Clarkson, Carrie Underwood, Taylor Hicks, Ruben Studdard, Chris Allen, Philip Phillips, I think was one of them. But yeah, that's about it. I know there was about 15 seasons of that. Biggest Loser I watched back in the day a lot. I feel like that was the closest of all the wrong answers. Spoiler alert, Biggest Loser was not the correct answer. They have produced more male winners than female winners, but I tend to remember more female winners from The Biggest Loser from when I watched it than male winners. So, but ultimately the answer was D, Project Runway, and that is the one show out of the 4 that I had never seen before, ironically. So of course that was the correct answer. But they were the ones to produce, the only reality show to produce more female winners than male winners, which I kind of find surprising. To be honest, with all of these reality shows, reality competition shows, I do find that kind of surprising that is the only one to produce more female winners than male winners. But I guess we're going to have many more seasons of Survivor and probably Big Brother to help change that, so we'll see what happens moving forward. I love this question I'm going to get to right now for the next contestant, Frances Liberty from Las Vegas. She's an art teacher. We're going to skip ahead right to her $20,000 question because I knew the answer to this, but not for the same reason that she did. The question was basically asking, with 150 million plus men on the planet being named this, what is the most popular first name on Earth? And luckily for her, she had read this on her phone, doing some last minute studying the night or two before. So she came across this answer. I came across this answer about 10 years ago, as many of you did out there, I'm sure. I'm not sure if you recall this, but if you saw the movie Superbad, you know that McLovin had the option of putting the name Muhammad on his fake ID that he used in the movie, because that was the most common name in the world. And so if you're willing to trust a 2007 R-rated comedy movie for $20,000 on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire in 2017, then good on you. But that would have been, if I were her and I would have given that explanation and ultimately end up being wrong, that would probably have gone viral. I'm just saying, like, you just can't reference Superbad and be like, yes, I got my knowledge from this movie 10 years ago about a 17-year-old kid creating a fake ID and saying that the world's most popular name is Muhammad. Man, you better be right if that's going to be your reasoning on national TV on a game show. Ultimately, again, like many before her, she fell to the $30,000 question, basically asking the Borg Warner Trophy, which is considered the creepiest trophy in sports because it has miniature heads of all the winners on it, is given to the winner of what competition? Without knowing what the Borg Warner Trophy was, I also was leaning towards D, Mr. Olympia, as opposed to A, the Indy 500. Even though I've seen SportsCenter many a times and I've seen Indy 500 winners, I do not recall ever seeing small etched-on faces that look creepy on the trophy. But apparently there are. So, every day's a school day. And today I learned that there are creepy faces on the trophy for the winner of the Indianapolis 500. I mean, it all would have been rectified if I knew what the Borg Warner Trophy was in the first place. But, again, learned something new today. So, The Indy 500, its trophy, has creepy faces on it. One last note. The last contestant of the week, Brandon Turner from Oakland, California. He had a question. I felt that, not the question that was worded poorly, but the answer choices were very interesting that the writers gave. Basically, the question had to do with which of these were a group that backed up Grandmaster Flash versus a name of a Vin Diesel action car film. And the choices were A, Fast Five, B, The Furious Five, C, The Fast and the Furious, or D, Furious 7. Now, Grandmaster Flash was backed up by The Furious Five. If you knew that already, then the question's easy enough. Or if you're a fan of the Fast and the Furious franchise, you knew that Fast Five, Furious 7, and The Fast and the Furious were all names of movies in that franchise. But if you didn't, this is one of those where you can logic out a couple of answers just because they gave both Fast Five and the Furious Five. Now, obviously, the fifth movie in the franchise couldn't be named both Fast Five and the Furious Five, so one of them had to be the correct answer. So that was just... I don't know if the writers meant that, and we're hoping someone would pick up on that for it to be, sort of a gimme, or at least, you're able to eliminate the other two answers. Again, I just felt it was a very poor choice of answer choices there. But in the end, Brandon did know that the Furious Five backed up Grandmaster Flash, so he ultimately got that question right. And Brandon as well left with $5,000. So our big winner this week was Lisa Slutsky with $30,000 as she walked away. Good for her. I hope her and her husband enjoy their retirements, and that $30,000 helps out with that. And then again, one more special shout out to Dan North, the 19-year-old sophomore from Duke, who walked away with $20,000. That's going to be a tremendous help for someone that age going to a university of that stature. So congratulations to them and everyone else who played this week. Everyone else went home with $5,000, which is, nothing to be mad at. I mean, $5,000 for 30 minutes or less of work, not too bad for a day's work. So that pretty much does this week's episode of the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire recap. We're going to be doing hopefully more shows, including Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, The Price is Right. Go ahead and let me know down either in the comments or hit me up at Twitter at James Dallas Lape, Lape. That is my full name. You can hashtag TWIGS, standing for This Week in Game Shows. Let me know your thoughts or comments or any questions you have either about this show or any of the questions from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire this week. And let me know what other game shows you'd like me to cover, or let me know if you'd actually like to come on and discuss this with me, because I'm sure most of you are tired of hearing me talk after 40 minutes, and it's always nice to have other voices and other opinions and other questions that I may not have noticed coming to the show. So thank you for sticking with me for this time. Once again, This Week in Game Shows, hashtag TWIGS, on Twitter at James Dallas Lape, and we will see you next week. Thank you.